They say every writer puts a little of themselves into their work. Turns out, my wife put more than a little, and not with me. Who knew the real plot twist in her writing journey would be starring her partner in our wrecked marriage? My name is Daniel, and I've been married to Claire for 9 years. Claire is a freelance editor who's always been passionate about writing. It's one of the things I admired most about her when we first met. She has this natural talent for storytelling, an ability to craft characters and weave narratives that pull you in. Over the years, I encouraged her to pursue her dream of writing a novel, even as life got busy with jobs, bills, and everything else that comes with adulthood. About a year ago, Claire decided to take the leap and start working on her book. She said it was a bucket list goal, something she'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I was thrilled for her and fully supportive, doing my best to carve out time in our schedule so she could focus on her craft. It started as a solo project. Claire spent hours researching, brainstorming, and drafting at the little writing nook we set up in the corner of our living room. She'd share bits and pieces of her ideas with me, asking for feedback or bouncing around character concepts. I loved seeing her so passionate about something, and I felt proud to be a part of her process in even a small way. Then, one day, Claire mentioned she'd found a writing partner. His name was Oliver, and according to Claire, they'd met in an online writing group. She said he was an experienced author who had offered to help her refine her ideas and bring her story to life. At first, I thought it was great. Claire had been struggling with writer's block, and working with someone else seemed like a good way to spark creativity. Oliver quickly became a frequent topic of conversation. Claire would tell me about their brainstorming sessions, how he was helping her develop the plot and characters, and how his feedback was invaluable. She even joked that they were like co-authors, though she insisted the book was still her project. Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed sooner. The late nights became more frequent. Claire would stay up past midnight, typing away at her laptop or chatting with Oliver in what she described as collaborative sessions. She'd light up whenever she talked about their progress, her face glowing with excitement as she described how well they worked together. At first, I didn't think much of it. Writing is a time-intensive process, and I figured this was just part of the creative grind. I trusted Claire completely and saw no reason to question her. But then things started to shift. Claire began keeping her laptop closer, rarely leaving it unattended. She stopped sharing as much about the book with me, brushing off my questions with vague answers like, "Oh, we're still figuring it out." She also started dressing up more often, even when she was just working from home. When I asked about it, she laughed and said it made her feel more inspired. The name Oliver came up constantly. He wasn't just a writing partner anymore. He was her sounding board, her creative muse, her go-to for everything writing-related. I told myself it was normal, that having a mentor-like figure in her writing journey was probably a good thing. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a quiet whisper I tried to ignore. That whisper got louder when Claire announced she'd be attending a weekend writing retreat. She told me it was an opportunity to focus on the book without distractions and to meet some of her fellow writers in person. I thought it sounded great. She'd been working so hard, and I wanted her to have the space to fully immerse herself in her creative world. She mentioned Oliver would be there, but I didn't think much of it at the time. When the weekend arrived, I helped Claire pack her bags and wished her luck, telling her I couldn't wait to hear all about it when she got back. She kissed me goodbye, her smile bright and cheerful, and drove off with a level of excitement I hadn't seen in years. I spent the weekend catching up on errands and spending time with friends, trying not to think too much about how quiet the house felt without Claire's presence. She sent a few texts over the weekend, updating me on how the retreat was going and sharing photos of the scenic venue, a cozy cabin in the woods with picturesque views of the lake. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the unease that had been growing over the past few weeks. On the last night of the retreat, I was scrolling through social media when something caught my eye. One of the other writers at the retreat had posted a group photo, tagging Claire and several others, including Oliver. In the photo, Claire and Oliver were standing next to each other, their shoulders almost touching. He was leaning in slightly, smiling at her in a way that felt too familiar, too comfortable. Claire, meanwhile, looked happier than I'd seen her in years, her expression glowing with what could only be described as admiration. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask. Was I imagining things? Was this just a harmless partnership, or was there something more going on? For the first time in our marriage, I felt a crack in the foundation of our trust. I didn't know it yet, but that photo was just the beginning. When Claire came back from the writing retreat, it felt like things returned to normal, or at least as normal as they could be after weeks of doubt gnawing at my mind. She was in high spirits, talking nonstop about how productive the retreat had been and how much progress she'd made on her book. I smiled and nodded, doing my best to match her enthusiasm. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo I'd seen. For a while, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Claire wasn't the type to cheat. She'd always been honest and straightforward, and I had no real proof of anything beyond the closeness I'd seen between her and Oliver. People can be friends without it meaning anything, right? But the thing about doubt is that it doesn't just disappear. It lingers, creeping into your thoughts at the most unexpected moments. Claire and I slipped back into our usual routines. She spent her days editing projects for her clients and her evenings working on the novel. Her energy and focus were admirable, but there was a shift I couldn't ignore. She seemed more guarded, less inclined to share the details of her writing with me. Whenever I asked about the book, she'd give vague answers or tell me she didn't want to spoil anything. "Just wait until it's done," she'd say, smiling as if that was supposed to reassure me. I wanted to believe her, but the distance between us was growing. Oliver's name still came up frequently, though Claire made an effort to downplay his involvement. She referred to him as her writing buddy or collaborator, as though they were equals in this process. But her body language told a different story. She'd light up when she talked about him, her voice gaining an energy that wasn't there when she spoke about anything else. Then there were the late-night sessions. Claire started staying up later than usual, claiming she was in the zone and needed to capitalize on her creative flow. I didn't think much of it at first. Writers are notorious for keeping odd hours, but it became a pattern. I'd go to bed alone most nights, hearing the faint clatter of her keyboard in the next room. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her still at her desk, headphones in, oblivious to the world around her. One night, I decided to peek in on her, just to see what she was working on. The door to her office was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I could hear the faint sound of her voice. At first, I thought she was on a call with a client, but then I heard her laugh, a soft, genuine laugh that made my chest tighten. She was talking to someone, and it didn't take long to realize it was Oliver. I stepped away before she could notice me, retreating to our bedroom with my mind racing. What were they talking about? Why did she feel the need to call him so late at night? Was this just part of their collaboration, or was it something more? The next morning, I tried to push the doubts aside. Claire was cheerful and affectionate, acting as though nothing was out of the ordinary. We had breakfast together, talked about Harper's upcoming school projects, and even made plans for the weekend. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but the cracks were still there, just beneath the surface. I started noticing more small details, things I would have ignored if not for the lingering doubts in my mind. Claire had started dressing differently, opting for outfits that were more polished and flattering, even when she wasn't leaving the house. She began wearing perfume again, something she hadn't done in years. And then there was her phone. Claire had never been secretive about her phone before. She used to leave it lying around the house, unlocked and accessible. But now, it was always within arm's reach, the screen facing down whenever she wasn't using it. She'd smile at messages she didn't share and quickly change the subject if I asked who she was texting. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was reading too much into it. But the doubts wouldn't go away. The tipping point came one afternoon when I was tidying up the living room. Claire had left her laptop open on the coffee table, her writing document minimized but still visible. I wasn't planning to snoop, but my eyes caught a glimpse of the chapter title, The Forbidden Connection. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the document. What I found left me reeling. The chapter was a vivid, emotional scene between two characters, a married woman and her writing partner. The descriptions were intimate, the dialogue charged with tension and desire. It felt raw, personal, like Claire was pouring her own experiences into the story. My heart sank as I read the final paragraph, a confession of love, whispered in the quiet of a late-night writing session. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. Was this just fiction? Or was it Claire's way of processing something real? The questions churned in my head, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them yet. I needed more. I needed proof. They say when you're looking for the truth, it has a way of finding you, usually when you least expect it. I wasn't prepared for how it would unfold, or how the simple act of running errands would lead to the confirmation I had been dreading. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Claire had holed herself up in her office, claiming she was working on some final edits for the book. She mentioned nothing about Oliver, but I didn't need to hear his name to know he was somehow involved. The park near our house was always a good spot to unwind. The walking trails, the sound of birds, the rustling leaves, it usually gave me a sense of peace. But not that day. As I rounded a corner on one of the trails, I froze. There they were, Claire and Oliver, walking side by side, laughing like old friends sharing a private joke. She was dressed casually but elegantly, in a way that suggested she had taken extra care with her appearance. He leaned toward her, close enough to make it clear they weren't just writing partners. For a moment, I thought about confronting them right then and there, but the shock of seeing them together stopped me. Instead, I instinctively reached for my phone, snapping a quick photo from behind the cover of a tree. The image was clear enough. Claire smiling up at Oliver, his hand casually resting on her lower back. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding in my chest as they walked past, completely unaware of my presence. I waited until they were out of sight before leaving the park, the photo still open on my phone. That image felt like a final piece of the puzzle, the confirmation I needed to confront what I already knew deep down. This wasn't just a partnership, it was a betrayal. When I got home, Claire was exactly where she said she'd be, sitting at her desk with her laptop open, headphones in, and a mug of coffee by her side. She greeted me briefly, too focused on her screen to notice the turmoil I was carrying. I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed to be smarter than that. That evening, I sat down and reviewed everything I had. The text I'd seen, the photo from the writing retreat, the suspicious receipts for dinners and rideshares, and now this, the photo of Claire and Oliver at the park. The evidence was piling up, but I wanted more. If I was going to confront her, I needed to make sure there was no way she could deny it. The next day, I made the call. The lawyer I contacted was a calm, experienced professional who listened without judgment as I explained the situation. I walked him through everything. Claire's late nights, her closeness with Oliver, the photo I'd taken at the park. He was sympathetic but clear. While what I had so far was compelling, it might not be enough in a court of law. He advised me to gather more evidence. If Claire and Oliver were using their collaboration as a cover for an affair, there would likely be financial records, correspondence, or other documentation that could solidify my case. So that's what I did. I started going through our bank statements, focusing on charges that didn't fit her usual spending patterns. Sure enough, there were several that stood out. Dinners at upscale restaurants, hotel bookings during her writing retreat, and even a charge for flowers that she never brought home. I also began tracking her movements more closely. When she said she was going to the library or a cafe to write, I checked the locations on our shared calendar app. A few times, her actual location didn't match where she said she'd be. The deeper I dug, the more undeniable the pattern became. Claire and Oliver weren't just working on a book together. They were writing the story of an affair, one chapter at a time. As painful as it was to uncover the truth, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The doubts that had been gnawing at me for weeks were finally laid bare, and I could see the situation for what it was. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for the end of my marriage. Claire had made her choices, and now I was making mine. They say art imitates life, but in Claire's case, her life had turned into a piece of fiction I was no longer a part of. The irony wasn't lost on me when she came into the living room one evening, beaming with excitement, to announce that her book was finally finished. She said it like it was our shared triumph, as though I hadn't spent the past few months unraveling the truth about her so-called collaboration. Claire explained that she'd be presenting her book at a local author showcase in a few weeks. The event was being hosted by the same online writing group where she'd met Oliver, and he would be there to support her as her partner. She spoke with pride, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I smiled and congratulated her, playing the role of the supportive husband one last time. But inside, I was making plans of my own. For weeks, I'd been carefully collecting evidence of her betrayal. The photo I'd taken of her and Oliver in the park was just the beginning. I had their texts, screenshots of receipts for dinners and hotel stays, and even excerpts from her book that mirrored the very affair she thought she'd hidden so well. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was preparing to deliver it in a way she'd never forget. The idea hit me as Claire was rehearsing her presentation one night. She was practicing her reading, going over passages that I could only assume were veiled confessions of her relationship with Oliver. As I listened to her recite lines about forbidden love and a connection too strong to deny, I realized that the presentation wasn't just an opportunity for her. It was an opportunity for me. Claire's book wasn't just a novel. It was her undoing. The day before the event, I finalized my plan. I went to a local print shop and had the most damning photo of Claire and Oliver enlarged and printed on terracotta-colored paper, giving it a striking, unforgettable backdrop. The image showed them in the park, his arm around her as they laughed together, looking every bit like a couple in love. Across the bottom of the photo, I added a satirical inscription, "The real collaboration, a love story unfit for fiction." But I didn't stop there. I had smaller versions of the photo printed and inserted them into several copies of Claire's book. Each photo was tucked neatly between the pages, hidden like a secret waiting to be discovered. I placed them strategically, ensuring that anyone flipping through the book at the event would stumble upon the truth. The next day, I arrived at the venue early, my plan carefully orchestrated. The event was being held at a small community center, with tables set up for each author to display their work. Claire's table was near the entrance, adorned with stacks of her books, promotional flyers, and a framed photo of her and Oliver smiling side by side. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity of it all. Before the event started, I slipped the terracotta-colored photo into the stack of books on her table, tucking it under the top layer where it wouldn't be immediately noticed. Then I positioned myself in the back of the room, waiting for the moment when her carefully constructed facade would come crashing down. As the event began, Claire was in her element, greeting attendees with her trademark charm and discussing the inspiration behind her book. Oliver hovered nearby, playing the role of the supportive partner, his presence a silent confirmation of everything I'd uncovered. It didn't take long for the first photo to be discovered. A woman browsing Claire's table picked up a book, flipping through the pages as Claire spoke. When she found the photo, her expression shifted from polite interest to shock. She glanced at Claire, then at Oliver, before quietly setting the book down and moving on. But the real moment came when someone found the terracotta print. An older man picked up a copy of the book, thumbing through it before noticing the oversized photo tucked underneath. He pulled it out, holding it up for a better look, and within seconds, the room fell silent. The inscription caught everyone's attention, and murmurs spread like wildfire as people began piecing together what they were seeing. Claire's confident demeanor faltered as more attendees picked up books, finding the smaller photos I'd hidden inside. Oliver's face went pale, his composure cracking under the weight of the unexpected exposure. I stayed in the back, watching as the truth unfolded in real time. Claire's attempts to recover were futile. The photos spoke louder than any excuse she could muster. Attendees whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others openly laughing at the spectacle. Claire's big moment had turned into a public unraveling, and there was no way to spin it in her favor. When the event ended, I walked out of the venue without a word. I didn't need to confront Claire or Oliver directly. The damage was already done. My marriage was over, but I'd made sure that Claire's betrayal wouldn't go unnoticed. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and exposing the lies that had taken root in our relationship. Claire had written her story, but I'd written the ending. When the dust settled, the aftermath of Claire's betrayal was as messy as the lies she'd built her life on. The photos at her book launch were the turning point, not just for our marriage, but for her entire reputation. Word of the incident spread quickly through her writing community, and while some tried to frame it as art imitating life, Most saw it for what it was, a scandal. Oliver faded into obscurity not long after. Whatever connection they'd shared couldn't survive the humiliation, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd quietly distanced himself from her. As for Claire, her book didn't quite take off the way she'd hoped. Readers were more interested in the drama behind the scenes than the pages themselves. I finalized the divorce shortly after the event. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Walking away from the life we'd built together was painful, but staying would have been worse. Now, months later, I feel free. I'm rebuilding, rediscovering who I am outside of the shadow of Claire's lies. Betrayal is a wound that doesn't heal overnight, but exposing the truth gave me the closure I needed. In the end, Claire wrote the story, but I made sure the truth was in the footnotes.